My entitled parents stole my dream car to spoil my brother, thinking I'd just accept it. They laughed in my face, saying, "Thanks to your car, he's happy." But what really happened next exposed their crime and destroyed them. I'm Alex, 28 male, and while I was on a business trip, my parents sold my dream sports car to fund my brother's luxury trip to Paris. It sounds like the kind of exaggerated story you'd read online, a fiction crafted for sympathy or outrage. I wish it were. For me, it was just the logical, painful endpoint of a family dynamic that had been in place for nearly 3 decades. My entire life had been a masterclass in learning that my achievements were merely resources, and my brother's whims were priorities. My family consists of my mother, Brenda, my father, David, and my younger brother, Leo. To an outsider, we might have looked like a perfectly normal suburban family. 2 sons, 2 parents, a house with a small yard. But beneath that placid surface was a current of favoritism, so strong it had carved canyons through our relationships. My mother was the driving force, a woman who saw her 2 sons not as equals but as different investments. I was the blue chip stock, reliable, steady, and meant to provide for the family's future. Leo, 5 years my junior, was her passion. Project, a flighty, artistic soul who needed constant funding and protection from the harsh realities of the world. A world I was expected to navigate on his behalf. My father, a quiet man by nature, simply followed my mother's lead. His silence was a form of agreement, a passive endorsement of the deeply skewed reality of our home. The pattern of favoritism wasn't subtle. It was woven into the fabric of our daily lives. I had worked relentlessly, sacrificing weekends and social events for late-night study sessions. I found a deep satisfaction in academic success, in building something with my mind. When I came home with a letter, I was bursting with pride. My mother glanced at it, offered a tight-lipped smile, and said, "Well, that's nice, Alex. Just make sure your speech isn't too long." We have Leo's soccer banquet the same night. The banquet was to celebrate Leo's team finishing 3rd in the local league. He had received a small plastic participation trophy. That trophy sat on our mantelpiece for 10 years. My valedictorian plaque was eventually moved to a box in the attic to make room for one of Leo's clay sculptures from a pottery class he'd abandoned after 2 weeks. Financial matters were even more stark. When I was in college, studying for the engineering degree that would become my career, I worked 2 part-time jobs to supplement my student loans. I was determined to graduate with as little debt as possible. I had managed to save a few $1,000s, a small emergency fund that gave me a sense of security. One summer, Leo decided he wanted to attend a prestigious and incredibly expensive photography camp in another state. My parents didn't have the cash on hand. I came home for a weekend to find my mother looking through my bank statements, which I had foolishly left on my desk. "Leo needs this for his portfolio, Alex," she had said, not as a request, but as a statement of fact. "It's an investment in his future. You're good with money, you can make it back." They didn't ask, they informed. They called it borrowing, but the term was a fiction. The money was taken, and it was never returned. When I tried to protest, my father stepped in with his usual placating tone. "Your brother just isn't built for the kind of work you do, Alex. We have to support his artistic talents. It's what families do." I spent the rest of my summer washing dishes and coding for a professor to make rent. Even milestones were measured on different scales. It was pleasant enough, but forgettable. For Leo's 18th birthday, 3 years later, my parents threw a massive catered party in our backyard. They rented a tent, hired a DJ, and invited over 100 people. My mother justified the expense by claiming it was important to celebrate his transition into adulthood, to give him a network of contacts. I stood in the corner of the yard, watching my parents present Leo with the keys to a brand new Cara. Practical sedan, they noted, purchased with a loan. I knew they were pressuring me to co-sign. I refused, which caused a fight that lasted for weeks, but they found another way. They always did when it came to Leo. So I learned to build a life for myself, separate from them. I graduated, landed a great job as a software engineer, and meticulously planned my finances. My one great passion, the one thing that was truly mine, was my car. It wasn't a new, flashy vehicle. It was a 1967 Ford Mustang, a wreck I had bought with my first major bonus. I spent 3 years of my nights and weekends in a rented garage, painstakingly restoring it. Every nut, every bolt, every inch of polished chrome was a testament to my own hard work. It was more than a car. It was my sanctuary, my trophy, my proof that I could build something beautiful for myself, by myself. It was the one part of my life I thought was untouchable. I was wrong. The business trip was the culmination of a year's worth of work. My partner and I had developed a new piece of logistics software, and we were on the verge of landing a transformative contract with a major shipping company. The trip was a week-long series of final presentations and negotiations in another city. It was high stakes, the kind of career-defining opportunity that could set me up for life. Before I left, I stopped by my parents' house for the customary farewell. As I was leaving, my mother followed me onto the porch. She glanced at my Mustang, which I had proudly driven over, its deep cherry-red paint gleaming under the afternoon. "Son, you know," she said, her tone light and airy. "It's a bit much, isn't it? All that money sunk into an old car." I just smiled. "It makes me happy, Mom. Leo could really use a more reliable vehicle," she continued, undeterred. "His sedan is having transmission problems again. Then he should get a job and save up for the repairs," I said, my voice firm but polite. The familiar tension settled, and this was how it always started. A casual observation, a mention of Leo's needs. And then the inevitable pivot toward what I should provide. "Don't be so cold, Alex," she chided. "You're his brother, and I've got a flight to catch," I said, ending the conversation. Before it could spiral, I drove away with a familiar knot in my stomach, but I pushed it down. I had bigger things to focus on. The week was a whirlwind of meetings and presentations. It was exhausting, but exhilarating. By the final day, we had a verbal agreement. The contract was ours. I was ecstatic, floating on a cloud of success and relief. That night, I celebrated with my business partner, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel an uncomplicated sense of pride. The first hint that something was wrong came not from a phone call, but from social media. I was scrolling through my phone at the airport, waiting to board my flight home, when a new post from Leo popped up. It was a picture of him, grinning ear to ear, raising a glass of champagne with the Eiffel Tower sparkling in the background. The caption read, "Paris is even more beautiful than I dreamed, feeling so inspired." A huge thank you to the most generous and supportive parents in the world for making this happen. I stared at the photo. Generous parents. My parents struggled to pay their property taxes every year. A cold dread began to creep up my spine. Where did they get that kind of money? I immediately sent a text to my mom, saw Leo's post. "How did you afford to send him to Paris?" A minute later, her reply came back. It was a single, cheerful sentence that made my blood run cold. "We finally found a good use for that old car of yours." I read the text again and again. It didn't make sense. It was a joke. It had to be. A sick, twisted joke. My hands started to tremble. I called her. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright. "Alex, are you on your way home?" "Your father and I were just talking about you, Mom," I said, my voice tight. "What does your text mean? What did you do?" There was a brief pause. "Don't take that tone with me," she said, her cheerfulness instantly replaced by defensiveness. An opportunity came up for Leo. A gallery owner in Paris showed interest in his work, and he needed to go immediately. "What did you do with my car?" I enunciated each word, my voice low and dangerous. "We sold it," she said, the words sharp and final. "A collector made us a very good cash offer." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The background noise of the airport faded into a dull roar. My car, my Mustang. I couldn't form words. I felt a pressure building in my chest, an explosive mixture of grief and fury. "It was for the best, Alex," she continued, her voice softening into a tone of condescending sympathy. I disconnected the call, my hand shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. I leaned against the wall, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The fury was there, a white-hot inferno. But underneath it, a new feeling was beginning to form. The feeling of something breaking for good, and in that moment, I remembered the thick folder of documents locked in my filing cabinet at home. The anger didn't vanish, but it was joined by a chilling, crystal-clear sense of purpose. The flight home was the longest 6 hours of my life. I sat staring out the window at the endless expanse of clouds, my mind a maelstrom of emotions. The initial shock had given way to a profound sense of violation. It felt as if my parents had reached into my chest and torn out a piece of my soul, then gift-wrapped it for my brother. Every memory I had of restoring that car, the frustration, the triumphs, the quiet satisfaction, was now tainted by their betrayal. But as the hours passed, the raw, hot anger began to cool and solidify into something else. Resolve, I thought. About the loan, a few months ago, my business partner and I had decided to accelerate our software development. To do that, we needed a capital injection. I didn't want to give up equity, so I took out a formal business loan. I didn't have much in the way of traditional collateral, but the one thing I owned outright that had significant appraisable value was the Mustang. I had it professionally appraised and used it to secure the loan. The car wasn't just my property, it was a legally encumbered asset. The bank, not I, held the title deed at the time. I had felt a pang of unease about leveraging my prized possession. Now, a grim, bitter irony washed over me. In their haste to fund my brother's latest whim, my parents hadn't just sold my car. They had sold property that legally belonged to a financial institution. They had committed fraud. By the time the plane landed, my path forward was clear. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my gut, but it was no longer in control. My emotional response had been replaced by a cold, calculated logic. This was not just another family squabble. This was the end. I took a taxi from the airport. I couldn't bear the thought of asking a friend for a ride and having to explain why I no longer had a car. The driver dropped me off at the end of my parents' driveway. I had been staying with them temporarily for a few months to save money for a down payment on my own place, a decision I now regretted with every fiber of my being. The house was quiet, my father's car gone from the driveway. He was likely still at work. My Mustang's spot in the garage was painfully, cavernously empty. I walked in the front door. My mother was in the kitchen, humming to herself as she wiped down the counters. She looked up and smiled, a bright, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There you are. Welcome back," she said. "Did you have a good trip? You must be exhausted." I dropped my suitcase by the door and walked slowly toward her, my footsteps echoing in the silent house. I didn't return her smile. "Where is it, Mom?" Her smile faltered. "Where is what, dear?" "My car," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Where is my car?" She sighed, a put-upon sound of a mother dealing with a difficult child. She dried her hands on a dish towel and leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms. This was the moment she had prepared for, the moment she would put me in my place. Her expression shifted from feigned ignorance to mocking triumph. "Thanks to your car," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "our son is enjoying his trip." She smirked, a cruel, self-satisfied twist of her lips. She expected me to yell, to argue, to break down in tears. She expected the same old dynamic to play out. Instead, I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a dry, hollow laugh that seemed to surprise even me. It was the laugh of someone who has just seen the final move in a long, painful chess game and realized with absolute certainty that he has won. My mother's smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of angry confusion. Her face hardened. The mask of the caring, supportive parent fell away, revealing the cold entitlement beneath. "Why are you laughing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and laced with fury. "There is nothing funny about this. We did what was best for this family." I let the laugh die in my throat and looked her directly in the eye. The cold resolve I had felt on the plane was now a shield of ice around my heart. "You're right," I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. "There is nothing funny about this. Not for you, anyway. You have absolutely no idea what you've done." My mother stared at me, her anger warring with a flicker of uncertainty. My calmness was unsettling. To her, it was a language she didn't speak. In our family's history of conflict, I was always the one who reacted with passionate, frustrated emotion, which she would then dismiss as immaturity. This quiet, cold version of me was a stranger. "What I've done," she scoffed, recovering her bluster, "is secure my son's future. Something you've never cared about." "You're talking about Leo?" I said, my voice flat. "But you're right. I haven't been thinking about his future. I've been thinking about my own, and you just put it in serious jeopardy. More importantly, you've put yourselves in jeopardy." I walked past her into the living room and set my briefcase on the coffee table. I clicked open the latches and pulled out a thick, plastic-sleeved folder. It contained my copy of the business loan agreement, the official appraisal of the Mustang, and the title transfer form showing the bank as the current lien holder. I laid the documents out on the polished wood, one by one. "What is all this?" she asked, following me into the room, her voice laced with suspicion. "This," I said, tapping the loan agreement, "is a legal contract between me and a federally insured bank. It's a business loan for $75,000 that I took out 2 months ago to fund the final development stage of my software." Her eyes widened slightly at the amount, but she quickly masked her surprise. "What does that have to do with anything? Good for you. You can pay back what we borrowed for Leo." I almost laughed again, but I held it back. "It has everything to do with everything, Mom, you see. To secure a loan of that size, I needed collateral. I needed to pledge an asset of significant value to the bank, an asset that, if I defaulted on the loan, the bank could legally seize and sell to recoup their money." I let the words hang in the air. I could see the gears turning in her mind, but the pieces weren't connecting yet. She was still wrapped in a protective layer of self-righteousness. Just then, the front door opened and my father walked in. He looked tired from a day at work. "Alex, you're back," he said with a weary smile. "How was the trip?" He's being ridiculous. "David, my mother," snapped before I could answer. "He's throwing a tantrum about the car." My father's smile faded. He looked from his wife's angry face to my stoic one. "Now, son, your mother explained the situation to me. It was a great opportunity for Leo." "Dad," I interrupted, my voice sharp enough to cut him off. "I need you to listen very carefully. I'm only going to explain this once." I turned my attention back to my mother, but I spoke to them both. The asset I used as collateral for my $75,000 business loan was the Mustang. Silence. It was absolute. My father froze with his hand still on his briefcase handle. My mother's face went slack, her jaw hanging slightly open. The smug certainty drained from her expression, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. That's not possible," she stammered. "The title was in your name. We signed it over." "You signed over a worthless piece of paper," I explained, my voice as patient as a teacher explaining a difficult concept. "The real legal title was transferred to the bank as a lien holder the moment the loan was approved. It's standard procedure. That car was not mine to sell, and it certainly wasn't yours. It was, for all legal and practical purposes, the property of the bank." I slid the lien document across the table. "The term for what you sold is an encumbered asset. By selling it, you didn't just betray my trust. You defrauded a financial institution. That's a felony." My father sank onto the arm of the sofa as if his legs could no longer support him. He stared at the papers, his face pale. My mother, however, rallied. A new kind of fury ignited in her. The fury of a cornered animal. "You set us up," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "You did this on purpose. You put the car up for a loan without telling us, knowing we might need it for Leo. This is your fault." "My fault?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Did I force you to go behind my back? Did I make you sell my property without my permission? Did I tell you to value a 2-week vacation for a 23-year-old man over your own son's hard work? No. You did this, every single bit of it. You were so blinded by your favoritism and so certain of your entitlement to my life that you never once stopped to consider the consequences. Now, the consequences are here." I picked up my phone. "The first payment on my loan is due next week. When I don't make it 10, I won't, because my operating capital is now gone. The bank will initiate proceedings to seize their collateral. When they find out that you have illegally sold it to an untraceable collector for cash, who do you think they will come after? They will come after the people who signed the fraudulent bill of sale. They will come after you." The reality of the situation finally crashed down on them. This wasn't about a family argument anymore. This wasn't about hurt feelings. This was about lawyers and courts, and a debt so large it could swallow their entire world. The mocking smile was gone. In its place was pure, undiluted panic. The silence that followed my revelation was heavier than any argument we'd ever had. It was a silence filled with the deafening sound of my parents' world crumbling. My father David just sat there, staring blankly at the loan documents on the coffee table. He looked like a man who had been punched in the gut, all the air and fight knocked out of him. My mother, Brenda, however, transitioned from panic directly into rage. It was a desperate, flailing rage aimed at deflecting blame. "Be so irresponsible, Alex," she yelled, her voice trembling. "Tying up your car in a loan like that? It's reckless. We're your parents. We should have been consulted." I repeated, the word tasting absurd on my tongue. "You think you have a right to be consulted on my private financial decisions? The same way you consulted me before selling my property. The car was in my name. The loan was in my name. The business is in my name. The only names on the fraudulent bill of sale, I presume, are yours. You did this to us," she accused, pointing a shaking finger at me. "This is some kind of sick revenge because you've always been jealous of your brother." That was the line. The one statement so profoundly disconnected from reality that it severed the last frayed thread of any familial obligation. "I felt jealous," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I'm not the one who needs his parents to steal from his brother to fund his life. I'm not the one who has failed at every adult responsibility. I have built a career. I have built a future. All you did was try to tear a piece of it down to prop up your perpetual failure of a son. This isn't my fault. This is the bill for 28 years of your choices finally coming due." My father finally spoke, his voice weak. "Son, we can fix this. There has to be a way. We can call the man who bought it. We'll give him his money back." "The collector?" I asked. "Mom said he paid in cash. Do you have a name, a phone number? Or did you just hand over the keys and a forged title to a stranger in a parking lot for a bag of money?" My mother's silence was the answer. Of course they didn't have his information. They had been so eager, so focused on getting the money for Leo that they hadn't bothered with due diligence. They had likely been taken advantage of, selling the car for far less than its appraised value of over $80,000. "How much?" I asked bluntly. "How much did you sell it for?" My mother mumbled something incoherent. "How much, Mom?" I demanded. "$30,000, my father whispered, his eyes squeezed shut in shame. $30,000 for a car worth nearly 3 times that. A car that was now collateral for a loan of $75,000. The sheer staggering incompetence of it was almost impressive. They hadn't just committed fraud, they had done it at a massive loss. "We have to call Leo," my mother said suddenly, her eyes wide with desperation. "He'll know what to do." It was the most pathetic, delusional statement I had ever heard. Leo, the source of the problem, was now their proposed solution. Before I could even respond, she had her phone out, her fingers flying across the screen, dialing an international number. She put it on speakerphone, a last desperate attempt to form a united front against me. It rang once, twice, and then Leo's voice filled the room, cheerful and distant. "Mom, hey, you won't believe the amazing croissants I had this morning. This city is incredible." "Leo," my mother said, her voice strained. "Honey, we have a problem. A big problem. A problem. What's wrong?" The cheer in his voice faded slightly. "It's Alex," she said, casting a venomous glare in my direction. "He's trying to ruin everything. He's saying, we weren't supposed to sell the car. He says it was tied to a loan." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What? That's crazy. He's just saying that because he's mad. Don't listen to him. It's true." "Leo, my father," chimed in, his voice cracking. "There's paperwork from a bank. We're in serious trouble." The reality began to sink in for Leo, not as a moral failing, but as a threat to his comfort. "What kind of trouble? What does that mean for me? My trip isn't over, is it?" And that was it. That was the question that sealed his fate in my mind. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "What can I do to help?" But, "What does that mean for me?" "Your trip," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice, carrying clearly over the speakerphone, "is the least of your worries. The money you're living on right now is the proceeds of a crime that is about to cost this family everything. Alex, you stay out of this." Leo's voice was suddenly shrill. "You're just trying to spoil my happiness. Your happiness was bought with fraud." "Leo," I said calmly, "and the fun is over. You need to come home now, because Mom and Dad are going to need that $30,000 to hire a lawyer." I watched the color drain from my mother's face. As I spoke, the call ended abruptly. Don't know if Leo hung up or she did. The three of us were left in the suffocating silence of the living room, the weight of the impending disaster pressing down on us. The meltdown was complete. All that was left were the consequences. Leo arrived home 2 days later. The triumphant, inspired artist who had left for Paris was gone, replaced by a sullen, resentful young man who looked as if he'd been personally wronged by the universe. He didn't come home with apologies or remorse. He came home with accusations. I was in my room, packing the last of my things into boxes. I had already found a new apartment and was preparing to move out. I had no intention of being there when the official letters from the bank started arriving. I was packing up my books when Leo burst into the room without knocking. "You?" he snarled, pointing a finger at me. "You did this? You ruined everything." I didn't even look up from my box. "I didn't sell my own car, Leo. I didn't commit fraud to pay for your vacation." Don't confuse the person who exposed the problem with the people who created it. "It was just a car," he exclaimed, his voice rising. "A stupid old car." I was making connections in Paris. A gallery owner was going to look at my portfolio. This was my big break, and you destroyed it over a piece of metal. I slowly placed a book into the box, closed the flaps, and finally turned to face him. For the first time, I looked at my brother not as family, but as a stranger. I saw him for what he was, a deeply entitled, emotionally stunted man-child who had been so coddled his entire life that he was incapable of understanding cause and effect. That piece of metal represented 3 years of my life. Leo, it represented my discipline, my passion, and my hard work. "Qualities you wouldn't understand," I said, my voice cold and even. "But you're right about one thing. In the end, it's not about the car anymore. It's about the fact that you, Mom and Dad, believe you have the right to take whatever you want from me for your own benefit. You see me not as a son or a brother, but as a resource, a walking bank account to be tapped whenever you see fit, and that is over." For good. Our parents hovered in the hallway, drawn by the raised voices. They looked haggard and broken. They had spent the last 2 days on the phone, desperately trying to understand the legal hole they were in. The reality had set in, and it was brutal. "Alex, please," my father pleaded, stepping forward. "We're your family. We made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But we can't get through this without you. We need your help." "My help?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "What form would that help take? Do you want me to liquidate my business, the very thing you jeopardized, to pay off the loan you caused to default? Do you want me to spend the next 10 years of my life cleaning up your mess, the same way I was expected to give up my savings? For your summer camp, Leo, the same way I was expected to co-sign your car loan? No. The bank of Alex is closed." I picked up the last 2 boxes, ready to leave. I looked at the 3 of them, a united front of desperation and dysfunction. "Here's my final offer of help," I said, addressing all of them. "You have $30,000 in cash. My advice is to use it as a retainer for the best financial lawyer you can find. You are going to need one. When the bank calls me, I will tell them the truth, that my car was stolen and sold illegally by my parents. I will cooperate with them fully. Where the investigation goes from there is your problem, not mine. You would turn on your own family," my mother whispered, her face ashen. "You turned on me the moment you put a for sale sign in my car window," I replied. "You just didn't realize it. You thought it was business as usual, but this time you took too much." Walked toward the front door, my boxers in my arms. "Get a job, Leo?" I said softly. He stepped aside as if I had shoved him. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I didn't see my mother's tears or my father's look of utter defeat. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I felt only the clean, sharp, painful relief of a limb being amputated to save the body. The life I had known was over. My family, as I had known, it was gone. And as I drove away in a rented moving truck, heading toward my new apartment and my new life, the only thing I felt was free. 6 months passed. 6 months of quiet, productive, and blessedly drama-free existence. My business partner and I managed to secure a bridge loan from a different, more understanding investor who was impressed with our resilience and the quality of our software. The contract with the shipping company was finalized, and our venture took off even faster than we had anticipated. I moved into a spacious apartment overlooking a park, a place that was mine in every sense of the word. I followed my own advice to the letter. When the bank contacted me about the defaulted loan and the missing collateral, I told them the unvarnished truth. I provided them with a copy of the police report I had filed for the stolen vehicle and gave them my parents' names as the primary suspects. From that point on, I was treated as a victim of the crime, not a party to it. My lawyers handled the rest. I had no direct contact with my family, but news trickled in through the grapevine. A concerned aunt called me once. Her voice hushed with worry. She told me my parents' legal troubles were catastrophic. The bank was relentless. Faced with felony charges, they had been forced to liquidate everything. They sold the house I grew up in, the house where Leo's participation trophy once sat on the mantelpiece to cover a portion of the settlement. The $30,000 they got for my Mustang was a drop in the ocean of their legal fees, and debt. My father was forced into early retirement, his pension rated to pay off creditors. My mother, who hadn't worked in 30 years, had to take a job as a cashier at a grocery store. And Leo, the aspiring artist, the golden child, was working to minimum wage jobs. The luxury trip to Paris was now a bitter, distant memory, a symbol of the life they had blown up. Hearing this news, I didn't feel the spike of vengeful joy I might have expected. But for the family, we could have been. It was a grief for the years I had lost trying to earn their love, a love that had always been conditional and transactional. Their downfall wasn't my victory. To be the final chapter. One evening, I was sitting on my new balcony, watching the sun set over the city. My life was peaceful. My work was fulfilling. I was making friends who valued me for who I was, not for what I could provide. For the first time, I felt like the author of my own life. I had even started looking at car schematics again, thinking about a new project, a new dream to build one that no one could ever take from me. To anyone out there reading this, to anyone who has ever felt like their worth was determined by what they could give to others, I want you to hear me. Your life, your work, your passions are your own. You are not a resource to be plundered. Setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of self-preservation. It will hurt. It will feel like a part of you is dying. But from that ending, a new beginning can grow, one that is built on your own terms, in your own light, and for your own peace. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human, navigating a complex world of relationships and emotions. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.